Michael had met powerful men before, clients who commanded rooms with ease, but William was different. The moment he entered the conference room, his presence altered the atmosphere, electrified it. The kind of confidence he carried wasn't just cultivated from success. It was innate, embedded deep in his bones. His crisp charcoal suit was tailored to perfection. But it wasn't the fabric that held Michael's attention. It was the way William wore it like a second skin. Throughout the presentation, Michael felt the weight of William's gaze, lingering in a way that was both unsettling and intoxicating. Each time their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, something that made Michael's pulse quicken, his throat go dry. It wasn't the typical detached curiosity of a client assessing talent. No, this was sharper, hungrier. As the meeting adjourned, the others filtered out in polite chatter, but William remained. With slow, deliberate steps, he closed the distance between them, his voice dropping to a low, velvety register. "Excellent work on the campaign," he murmured. Then a pause. A flicker of hesitation before indulgence one. "Dinner? I'd love to discuss it further, somewhere more private." The invitation hung in the air like a dare. Michael knew he should refuse. But as William's fingers ghosted over the edge of his desk, he knew he wouldn't. The restaurant was cloaked in dim amber light, the kind that made everything feel intimate, secretive, dangerous. Michael had chosen his outfit carefully, something sharp enough for business, but suggestive enough to hint at possibilities. Across from him, William sat in effortless control, swirling a glass of deep red wine between his fingers, the candlelight flickering against his salt and pepper hair. There was something intoxicating about watching a man so powerful relax, unwind, reveal glimpses of the man beneath the suit. As they talked, the conversation meandered through art, philosophy, and the intricacies of desire. William spoke with the ease of a man used to being listened to, but there was a crack in his composure, an unspoken tension between them that neither acknowledged but both felt. His hand brushed against Michael's, barely a whisper of touch, yet potent enough to send a ripple through his skin. Michael could feel it, the slow, deliberate build-up, the heat beneath the words. When William finally leaned in, voice dipping lower, it felt like gravity itself pulled them closer. "Would you like to continue this conversation somewhere more private?" Michael's heart pounded. You should have said no. You should have thought about the ring gleaming on William's hand, about the life that existed beyond the private walls of that restaurant. But all he could think about was the way William's gaze felt like a slow undressing, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. With a measured inhale, he nodded. And just like that, the line was crossed. The penthouse was a world away from the city below, a sleek, glass-walled sanctuary that overlooked Boston's skyline, the night stretching endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Michael stood by the glass, fingers tracing the condensation on his whiskey tumbler, his pulse a slow, deliberate drum against his ribs. He shouldn't have come, but William was behind him now, close enough that his breath ghosted against the nape of Michael's neck. The air between them felt like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you," William murmured, his voice rough with restraint, yet thick with something unspoken. Michael turned, facing him, their bodies just a breath apart. His gaze flickered to the wedding band glinting under the soft glow of city lights, then back to William's face. "This is dangerous," he whispered, but he didn't move away. William's lips curled into something between a smirk and a confession. "I know." Then he kissed him. It wasn't tentative. It wasn't slow. It was a collision of need, of restraint unraveling, of months of stolen glances igniting into something neither could deny any longer. William's hands were firm, possessive, exploring the planes of Michael's body as if committing him to memory. By the time they reached the bedroom, a trail of discarded clothing mapped their path. Michael was lost in the heat, in the weight of William above him, in the way their bodies fit like inevitability. The days that followed were a blur of stolen glances, whispered confessions, and the insatiable pull of something forbidden. Michael found himself craving William's presence in ways he hadn't expected, his body betraying him at the mere sound of his voice, at the memory of his hands, strong, possessive, reverent, ghosting over his skin. It wasn't just sex, though the nights they spent together were nothing short of a fevered symphony, bodies moving in rhythm, breathless and desperate. It was the way William looked at him when they weren't tangled in sheets, the quiet moments between the storm that made Michael realize he was already in too deep. At work, they played their roles well. William would walk into a meeting, his presence commanding as always, his suit perfectly tailored, his demeanor unreadable. But then, their eyes would meet across the boardroom, a flicker of heat, a silent dare, a reminder of what they had done and what they would do again. One afternoon, as the team dispersed from yet another client review, William lingered behind. The door shut with a quiet click. "You drive me insane," he murmured, his voice low, dangerously close. Michael barely had time to react before he was pressed against the wall, William's lips at his throat, his hands already unfastening buttons, claiming him in the very space where professionalism should have reigned. "We shouldn't," Michael gasped, even as he arched into the touch. William's chuckle was dark, indulgent. "Then tell me to stop." Michael didn't. He never did. The weight of their affair was becoming heavier, pressing down on Michael like a secret he couldn't contain, yet had no intention of releasing. Each stolen night, each whispered confession, each moment spent in William's bed left him craving more. But the reality of it all crashed over him like an unrelenting tide whenever William's phone buzzed with a message from Robin, whenever he murmured an excuse about dinner with Cody and Lily, whenever he slipped his wedding ring back onto his finger as if their nights together had never happened. One evening, tangled in the warm sheets of the penthouse, their bodies still slick from the fire they had ignited, Michael traced lazy circles along William's bare chest. The city lights flickered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the sharp angles of William's face, the barely there frown that had become more frequent in recent weeks. "Tell me about her," Michael murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. William exhaled slowly, as if the question had been inevitable. "Robin is dependable. We build a life together. A partnership. But love? Passion?" His voice trailed off, fingers brushing absent-mindedly over Michael's arm. "I thought I understood what it meant to want someone, to crave them, until I met you." The words should have thrilled Michael, but instead, they sent a hollow ache through his chest. He wanted to be more than an escape. He wanted to be the only one William reached for in the dark. But deep down he knew he wasn't. The longer their affair stretched on, the more reckless William became. What had once been careful, measured encounters hidden behind locked doors and dim lighting had started bleeding into the daylight. He found reasons to call Michael into his office, brushing fingers against his when handing over reports, letting his gaze linger too long, too hungrily during meetings. When they met at the penthouse, William's kisses were more urgent, his hands more demanding, as if he were trying to consume Michael, as if he were afraid of losing him. One evening, as the rain poured against the city streets, William showed up at Michael's apartment unannounced. His shirt was damp, his usually composed demeanor slightly unraveling. "Robin's away for the weekend," he murmured, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Michael barely had time to respond before William's lips crashed against his, hands pulling at his clothes, desperate. It was different this time. Frantic, consuming, a fire set to the carefully constructed boundaries they had once upheld. They barely made it to the couch before William pressed Michael down, their bodies colliding in a heated frenzy. Afterward, as they lay entangled, William whispered against Michael's bare shoulder, "I don't want to keep sneaking around. I want more. I need more." Michael closed his eyes, heart pounding. He had wanted to hear those words for so long, but as he looked at William, the longing, the conflict, he realized with a sinking certainty that neither of them had the answer to what came next. The moment everything shifted was not an explosion, but a slow, sinking realization. Michael had always known their stolen moments were borrowed time, but it wasn't until that night at the company gala that the weight of reality pressed down on him with unbearable force. From across the grand ballroom, he watched as William moved through the crowd, his hand resting on the small of Robin's back, a gesture that once felt obligatory, now seeming forced. Robin, radiant in emerald silk, laughed at something a guest said, unaware of the silent storm brewing in her husband's gaze. But Michael saw it. He recognized the restless tension in William's posture, the way his eyes flicked across the room, searching for him. Then, for just a second, their eyes locked. It was a fleeting, electric moment, a universe of unspoken words compacted into a single glance. Desire, regret, longing, and something far more dangerous, hope. Michael turned sharply, walking toward the exit, his breath shallow. He needed air, needed space. But William was faster. Strong fingers wrapped around his wrist just as he reached the quiet corridor. "Don't walk away." William's voice was low, urgent. Michael's pulse thundered. "This isn't fair. Watching you with her, pretending like none of this exists." William stepped closer, his breath warm against Michael's cheek. "It exists. It's real. And I love you." The confession shattered something inside Michael, leaving him breathless, because it was what he had wanted for so long. And yet, it was already too late. The weight of their love had always been heavy, but now, it was suffocating. As Michael lay tangled in William's sheets, his body still humming from the aftershocks of their desperate, fevered lovemaking, he felt the world outside this penthouse closing in. William's arms were strong around him, his breath slowing, steadying against Michael's neck. But there was no comfort in it. Not anymore. Michael had promised himself that he wouldn't do this again. That the stolen moments, the whispered declarations, the reckless hunger, they had to stop. But when William had kissed him tonight, devouring him like he was the only thing keeping him alive, Michael had surrendered just like he always did. Now, in the aftermath, he traced idle patterns across William's bare chest, savoring the warmth of his skin even as guilt clawed at his ribs. "Stay," William murmured, pressing a kiss to his temple, his voice thick with exhaustion. Michael's throat tightened. He wanted to. God, he wanted to. But love built in the shadows was not love at all. It was a prison, one that neither of them could truly escape. "I can't." His voice barely made it past his lips, but the way William stiffened against him said he had heard it. A long silence stretched between them before William exhaled, pressing his forehead against Michael's. "I love you." Michael squeezed his eyes shut, feeling his heart splinter in his chest. "I love you too." And then, before he could change his mind, he slipped out of bed and walked away. Years had passed, yet Michael still carried the ghost of William's touch, the lingering imprint of a love that had burned too bright to last. San Francisco had been his salvation, a city where he could breathe, where he could love without secrecy, without shame. His life had taken shape in ways he never imagined. A thriving career, friendships that grounded him, and now, a future with Kevin, a man who loved him openly, fully, without hesitation. But as Michael walked through the familiar streets of Boston for the first time in years, the memories stirred. The places where they had met in secret, the stolen glances, the desperate touches, they all lived here, woven into the fabric of the city. And then, through a restaurant window, he saw him. William sat across from another man, his eyes alight with laughter, his hand resting easily over his companion's. The sight should have hurt, but instead, Michael smiled. This was what they had fought for, what they had sacrificed for. Some love stories don't last forever, but that doesn't make them any less real. Michael turned and walked away, his heart full, his own love story still unfolding. Love, like life itself, is rarely simple. It teaches us, shapes us, and sometimes it forces us to make painful choices. Michael and William's story is a reminder that not all love is meant to last forever. But that doesn't make it any less valuable. In today's world, where people often hide behind expectations, it's crucial to be honest with ourselves and with those we care about. Love should never be just an obligation. It should be real, freeing, and transformative. If you ever find yourself torn between passion and duty, remember, the right love will never demand that you lose yourself.